Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Announcers Hour podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCall. Today we have Rich Hollenberg joining me. Really excited because he has so much experience in multiple channels in sports, media, and broadcasting. And Rich, how are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Fired up to get ready for another Rays series. They have a little revenge on their minds playing the White Sox, who swept them last week on the South Side. So once I get off this interview that I've been looking forward to so much, I'm gonna dive into my prep work for the Rays and White Sox series.
And there's obviously a lot that's involved in that, and pretty much there's a lot of people that might not know you. I'm just wondering if you could introduce yourself and all the different things you're involved in right now.
Yeah, sure, Pat. So I am fortunate enough to essentially split up my sports year in half. So 6 months of the year, I work for ESPN calling college basketball games, mostly in the Big 12. And that lasts, as you would imagine, from around November all the way through the end of March. And then come the beginning of April, all the way through the end of October, and hopefully I'm knocking on woods through late October. I'm working for the Tampa Bay Rays. I cover them on the pre and post game shows for Bally Sports. And so I get to, how I describe it is, I get to flex both of those muscles. When I came up in the business, graduated from Syracuse University, I didn't really know exactly what path I wanted to take. I wanted to do everything. Uh, but I ended up now, 30 years down the road, I ended up being able to do two different disciplines, play by play announcer and a pre and post game host. So scratching both of those itches, if you will, and flexing those different sportscasting muscles has been an absolute blessing. And then on the side, I carved out enough time to start my own business, which I know you're familiar with. It's called the Break In and Breakthrough Cohort. And I started it close to 3 years ago with a best friend of mine from Syracuse who's an entrepreneur, and saw a need in the industry based on the intel that I was giving him that young sportscasters, and to be quite honest with you, Patrick, old sportscasters don't get enough critical feedback. We just don't hear enough about what we're doing right, what we could be doing better, how we could be doing it better. And so that was the genesis of starting a program to try to help all the up and coming sportscasters that I wanted to get to know. And like I said, 30 years in the business, I feel like I still have another 3 decades in me, but I also wanted to start paying it forward to the next generation. And that has been one of the greatest gifts that I could have ever given myself, because now I realize in just 2+ short years that this is going to be the legacy that I leave behind. Not any game that I call or any team that I cover. It's going to be the hundreds, and hopefully it ends up being thousands of sportscasters who I've gotten to know through the years through the benefit of this break in and breakthrough program.
That's great. And there's a lot. I like that you kind of touched on everything you have going on. Certainly some things we'll get into from the Syracuse to break and break through. But I'm just wondering, like right now, being with ESPN, obviously the last college basketball season and the Rays, what's kind of been your best moment recently that's standing out for you?
Gosh, well, the Rays have started slow this year, as you might know. So nothing quite yet that jumps out at me for the Rays this season. But it is a blast. I work side by side with one of my best friends, and a lot of what I say in this type of conversation, Patrick, are things you've heard of and things I talk about in my cohort. But chemistry is critical when you're working with somebody else, whether it's a co-host or an analyst, if you're a play-by-play announcer, or an interview subject, if you're a sideline reporter. It is so critical to making good television. And I happen to be lucky enough that I work with one of my best friends. Doug Wechter is my partner in crime. And what you see on TV with us in the pre and post game for the Rays is what we're like off camera as well. We like to have a good time. We like to debate. We like to bust each other's chops. And all of that comes through on TV. So on the Rays end, that's always a great memory and a great time. But going back to my most recent basketball season, I don't think I'm being biased when I say that the Big 12 has been and was last year the best conference in the country. And I'm fortunate to be calling those games now for 8+ seasons. And the very last game that I called, because ESPN doesn't have March Madness, so my March Madness takes place in Kansas City every year. I get to call the Big 12 tournament. And again, very fortunate that they have always done a fantastic job running that tournament. But Brett Yormark, who came on as the Big 12 commissioner a couple of years ago, has taken it to a new level. And it really does feel like March Madness, even though it's situated in Kansas City the whole time and it's just the Big 12 teams that are competing. It feels like the biggest of big time events. And the very last game I called this year was the #1 team in the country in the Houston Cougars. They didn't end up fulfilling their destiny like I thought they would. I really thought they were going to be in the national championship game, if not win the national title. But Jamal Shed ended up getting hurt down the road in the tournament, and he was the most valuable player in the nation. They don't hand out an award like that. They give the John Wooden Award and awards like that for most outstanding player. But there was no player more valuable to his team than Jamal Shed, the point guard for the Houston Cougars. So that was heartbreaking to watch that happen in the NCAA tournament, because I really felt like they were on a path that would easily lead them to the Final Four. So getting to call the Houston Cougars as my last game of the year was a really nice cherry on top of the sundae, so to speak.
And actually, one more thing on the topic of the Big 12, because a lot of those schools will be relevant again come next year. I mean, do you have any like preseason projection for which teams could really be in national title contention with, I mean, UConn's been the bulldozer right now for college basketball.
Yeah, it's UConn and everyone else, bro. I mean, even just to hear Danny Hurley and the language that he's using immediately after winning a second straight NCAA tournament, they are the team to beat, hands down. But Houston, bringing back 4 of their 5 starters, they are going to be a load. Baylor, it just came down the wire that Baylor got another humongous transfer, one of the top 5 guys in the transfer portal out of Miami. So Baylor's going to be a top 10 team, if not a top 5 team. And I think Kansas is loaded for bear, because if there's one thing I've learned in the 8+ years covering the Big 12 the Big 12 conference, it's that Bill Self does not suffer mediocrity very well. It happens once in a blue moon. It's like Halley's Comet when Kansas isn't competing for a national title. But the roster construction last year was not what anybody, let alone Bill, had anticipated. Hunter Dickinson's coming back. They've always got McDonald's All-Americas coming in. They pulled in a couple of transfers from the transfer portal. I think those 3 teams are going to be top 5, maybe all year long. And then in your neck of the woods, you have Arizona and Arizona State coming on board. And obviously Bobby Hurley's got, some track to cover if he wants to catch and compete with the Arizonas of the world. But I think Tommy Lloyd and Arizona are going to be super competitive this year as well. So that's 4 cats, literally and figuratively, right at the top of the Big 12 standings, who I feel could be right at the top of the NCAA national rankings when it's all said and done next March.
That's a good point. I know there's going to be a lot to look forward to, especially with the conference realignment, because a lot of that is starting now. But I guess throwing it back for a moment to when you got into the sports casting, because everybody wants to be doing like what you're doing right now, but a lot of people are intimidated for getting started. So I guess, can you explain kind of how you got started out of Syracuse and going into this industry?
Sure. It honestly, Patrick, it started a lot sooner than Syracuse. Like, the reason I went there was not because I loved Derek Coleman and Sherman Douglas, although I was a huge Syracuse basketball fan. The reason I went there in the first place, and the reason I knew I was going there before I even got into high school, was because I had experiences with a microphone in my hand when I was 10 years old. I wasn't on the stage. I wasn't a showman. I wasn't a kid actor, anything like that. But when I was 10 years old, my sister had a bat mitzvah and she was 13. And my parents said to me, you should MC your sister's bat mitzvah. So I got up there, me and my jacket and tie as a 10-year-old. And I realized whatever I was saying, the reaction I was getting from the audience, whether they were just being polite or just thought it was cute that a 10-year-old kid was speaking to this crowd with a microphone in his hand, I got an energy boost that I had not certainly felt in my 10 years on earth, but it was something that resonated in the deepest parts of my soul that said, I need to keep doing this. I want more of this. And I knew at that age that I wasn't going to be a singer. I wasn't going to be in a rock band or anything like that. And then I found out about 3 years later that I certainly wasn't going to be a professional athlete either. So right when that happened, I said to myself, how do I foster that passion that I felt, that electricity that I felt from speaking to an audience and getting that vibe that I got, and also do something that I love, which is follow sports. I grew up in New Jersey, and I was super lucky that through my dad's company, he had season tickets to the Yankees, to the Knicks, and to the Rangers. So my formative years growing up, I felt like my playground was Yankee Stadium and Madison Square Garden. And in those days, it didn't get better than that. I mean, no matter how good or bad those teams were, I was going to, maybe it was a few times a year. It's not like I was going to, 81 home games for the Yankees. I would go to a few games with my dad and my sister, maybe a couple of friends from time to time. But that feeling that I got walking into Yankee Stadium, walking into Madison Square Garden, that was the closest that I got to that feeling I had with a microphone in my hand. So the logical next step for me was, I want to be a sportscaster. Fast forward a couple of years, I went to a sports camp in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. And Honesdale, if you don't know, is the same place that five-star basketball camp is. And that is the most renowned basketball camp for blue chip high school basketball players. All the great college players come back and coach there. All the great college coaches would go back there to meet and greet and learn from other college coaches. It was ground zero if you are a basketball freak. And I was going to a sports camp right down the road from there. My counselor at my sports camp was a Syracuse guy. So he would go over to Five Star and cherry pick some of the Syracuse guys to come to our camp and give us clinics. And that's how I fell in love with Syracuse in the first place. And then this gentleman I'm telling you about, Gary Barnaba, who to this day is one of my dear friends, said to me, you've talked already about being a sportscaster. You know who went to Syracuse, don't you? And I said, who? And he said, Marv Albert went to Syracuse. And my eyes got big. And he said, and Bob Costas went to Syracuse. And my eyes got even bigger. Those were my two idols growing up. That's who I wanted to be. And from that moment on, as like a 13-year-old, I said, this is what I'm going to do. And that's where I'm going to start that career path. So it was preordained, if you will, that I was going to go to Syracuse. Then I quickly found out that is not a ticket to success. You don't graduate on one day with a diploma in your hand from Syracuse and the next day land a job that you've always dreamed about. It is a grind. Everyone's path is different. And like I said earlier, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. At the time, SportsCenter was just becoming a behemoth. So I wanted to be Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann. I wanted to be Chris Berman. But then I quickly realized, like a bucket of water on my head, wait a minute, those guys are in a studio. And I want to recreate that experience I had walking into MSG and walking into Yankee Stadium and the thrill of the crowd. You don't get that in a studio. So then I had to recalibrate. Well, what do I want to do? And again, the question mark was still above my head. I didn't have an exclamation point. I had a question mark. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I kind of fumbled through my first couple of years out of college. And I was very lucky that the Syracuse connection, we call it the Newhouse Mafia, helped me get my first two legitimate jobs in television. I got a job with a company called Sports Phone when I first graduated from college. Doesn't exist anymore. It sounds like it's from a million years ago. But the funny story is a lot of famous sportscasters worked at Sports Phone. It was a very small business operating out of Elmont, New York, which is out on Long Island. And it was essentially geared to cater to degenerate gamblers. So sportscasters like me would go to Elmont, New York, and we would have a bank of televisions with all the games on at that given day and night. And so that was cool for me because I was watching everything all at once. And every 10 minutes, we would go into a phone booth in the office, dial up a special number, and I would deliver a 2-minute sportscast, literally just reading off the updated scores. And you paid, I think it was 99 cents a minute to get access to those sports scores. So wherever you were, if you were close enough to a phone, you could keep updated on the games you were betting on. And I'll never forget, the jingle was, for all your sports news instantly, dial 976-1313. If you grew up in that area, you know exactly what I'm talking about if you're from my generation. So that was really my first job as a quote unquote sportscaster. But my first job in television was in Great Falls, Montana, market 172. And the only reason I got that job was because I kept in touch with one of my professors from the Newhouse School. And he said, one of your classmates who you graduated with is a news reporter out there. He just called to tell me that the sportscaster for that station is leaving. Would you be interested? And you know this very well. My philosophy was, I can't say no to anything because I'm just not in that position. So it's just say yes. I was a Jewish kid from New Jersey living in Manhattan at the time. I didn't know a thing about any parts of that country, let alone Great Falls, Montana, market 172, but I just said yes, sight unseen. And a few weeks later, I got the job, over the phone interview, didn't have to fly out there to meet the news director. And that was my first job in TV. 6 months later, very similar story. Same professor, same Newhouse graduate, not the same one, but another Newhouse graduate was leaving a job in Clearwater, Florida, and was wondering if there was someone from Newhouse who was interested in the job. I was. Chance to move back to Florida, chance to cover professional sports as well. And 6 months after getting my first job in TV, I had my second job in TV. And that was 25 years ago. And I've been living in the Tampa Bay area ever since then. And that goes all the way back to 1995, I think it was.
But you touched on a lot of good information. I like that you mentioned because this is like a running point I think we've had back to our first guest was Kyle Seeloff, voice of the Marlins, said everybody's got a different path. You know, there's not one way to do it. You started out obviously with that phone company, which seemed like, you know, again, like sports gambling might be separated, but I think definitely now more in bed with sports than ever. So you could just start there and you know, even if you had a dream of play-by-play, somehow you end up doing that off of, you know, the phone service. So there's always a way to run it back in as long as it's around that sports sphere and broadcasting. So again, that's been kind of a common theme that I like
Yeah.
that you brought up. And going off that, I was going to talk about your inspirations, but it sounded like Bob Costas was in there and Marv Albert and a lot of the guys. So I'm wondering once you got to Syracuse, kind of what that was like. I mean, nowadays the Syracuse is big experience, but you at least because the guys are so active on social media that you almost, I guess, can see a little bit of what it's like nowadays. But I'm wondering what was Syracuse like back then for you?
Uh, I think for me, honestly, Patrick, it was a lot different than it is now. I didn't I didn't sense when I was there in that bubble. I didn't sense the competitive nature that I see now from the people that I interact with, and I interact with a lot of Newhouse students still. Um, I just think it has become such a breeding ground for talented sportscasters. That and the fact that there are so many other schools that have dynamic broadcasting programs. I mean, you have obviously Northwestern and Georgia and Missouri and University of Florida. I mean, the Arizona State, the list goes on and on and on. And I don't want to, insult anybody by omitting their names, but there's too many to mention. There are so many terrific broadcasting programs. But again, Newhouse's reputation preceded itself. And I think now it just feeds on itself where the numbers continue to grow of people who have come out of there who are not only successful, but successful at a relatively early age. The one thing I remind everybody about, young and old, is that those are few and far between. I mean, just off the top of my head, you have Noah Eagle, Ian Sun. You have Drew Carter. Those guys were in school together a few years ago. I mean, they're in their mid-20s now, and Noah is getting set to call men's basketball for the Olympics on NBC. And he was the voice of the LA Clippers on the radio. Drew Carter got a job on air at ESPN right after he graduated. Now he's also the voice of the Boston Celtics. But those are two of thousands and thousands. There are success stories all over the place from Newhouse grads and non-Newhouse grads, but you just don't hear about them and see them as much as you see those kind of one percenters, as I would call them. Good for them for doing that, but they would be the first to tell you, oh my gosh, you heard about me and you heard about Drew. You haven't heard about the dozen other guys that were at WAER when we were there. They're amazing, and they are, but you just might not hear about them because they haven't reached that level yet. And success is defined differently by different people, right? Everyone wants the biggest games and the biggest moments and the biggest paychecks, but those things are rarefied air. I was just texting with Sean McDonough this morning because I wanted to compliment him on his Game 7 call when Boston beat Toronto in the NHL playoffs. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, this guy has been at it. He was Noah Eagle coming out of Syracuse. I mean, he was calling the World Series when he was in his late 20s. He was a prodigal son, just like Noah Eagle. And everyone's path is different. Those are the needles in the haystack. And I found myself just happy to be in the haystack at all. You get to cover sports. Okay, that checks the first box. Be grateful for that. Then it's, okay, I'm covering sports, but not in the market or in the region that I want to. So that's another hill to climb. You climb that hill, check that box. Every time you get to the top of a proverbial mountain, there's another mountain right behind it. The mountain range is endless and limitless. You're never going to get somewhere. I don't care who you are. And you get there and you go, now I've made it and now I'm good. Because there's always going to be something driving you, something that you wish you could do or that you want to do, or you have a goal set that you want to do. I'm 53 years old now, and there are still things I want to accomplish. I've always wanted to call NBA games. I didn't get to do that until I was in my 50s. So that tells me, as it should, as a lesson to all up and coming sportscasters, there is no specific timeline. You're never too young. You're never too old. Noah and Drew Carter and those types show that you could still be young, but you could still have the gravitas and the chops to pull it off at the highest level. But by the same token, you could be in your 50s and still feel like you're reaching your prime, because we've seen from the Vern Lundquists of the world, and the list goes on and on, you could be well into your 70s, and if you still have the passion for it, you could still be doing great, great work where you're educating the viewer and entertaining the viewer at the same time. And, in between the Vern Lundquists and the Noah Eagles of the world, that's where all of us live. We're all grinders. And the sooner you can embrace the idea that you want to be a grinder, you're not just being a grinder, as a means to an end. Um, for me, and I can only speak for myself, when I recognized that and embraced that, that's when I really started enjoying what I was doing for a living.
That's great that you touched on kind of those age markers of people that have really quick success. Because I think it's good to ask you, like, have you seen, still most of the people, I think still we can say like most of the people at the top doing the craziest games and a lot have so many years of experience and kind of that traditional uprising to where obviously you don't get like let's say the World Series until you've done this many years of baseball play-by-play and been on that grind. Like you just think of Al Michaels, for example, even though he's been the guy who's known for Sunday Night forever, like he was still, you go back like several years, he was still an older guy by the time he was getting those gigs. So I think you definitely still have to put in a lot of work, but at the same time it feels like those people rise up the ranks. Some people rise up the ranks really quickly and get there quick. So I'm wondering, now, especially as you have been in it for so long, have you seen that age get younger of people who can do that quick ascent and just kind of hop up the list really quickly and get to the big market and all that?
Absolutely. I think you'd be blind or not paying attention if you didn't notice it. And some of these guys are my friends. And a lot of it comes down to I hate using the term luck because I think, like Yogi Berra said, and whoever else would be credited with the quote, the harder I work, the luckier I get. Right. It's all effort based. If you're not, I always say, give me someone who's talented, but I would much rather take someone who's talented and matches that with his passion or her passion to be great at this craft because that's what it is. It's not a job. It's not an employment. It's a craft. It is like being an artist. It is like being a professional athlete or something like that. It's a craft. Um, but I think it's cyclical, and especially in baseball, but in all sports, really, it's timing. So you're seeing the end of the careers for a lot of legendary broadcasters. Um, Hawk Harrelson for the Chicago White Sox in his 70s, coming to the close of his career. And that happened to, fortunately for him, coincide with the uprising of a young Jason Benetti, who happened to be a Chicago kid, who happened to be really good at what he did, who happened to get a lot of notoriety for working at ESPN. Those two lines intersected at just the right time. If Jason came along 10 years earlier or 10 years later, heck, even a few years earlier or later, he would have missed that window of time when Hawk Harrelson's like, you know what, I'm going to cut back on my schedule. I'm only going to do home games. You know what? Now I'm seeing the finish line. I'm going to retire after next season. If it was a couple of years either way, Jason Benetti wouldn't have been the voice of the White Sox. And now, of course, the voice of the Detroit Tigers. Same thing with a good buddy of mine, Adam Amin. We came up with ESPN at the same exact time. He was tremendous in multiple sports, but he was really great on basketball. And ESPN gave him NBA basketball games to cut his teeth. So he caught some people's attention. And right at that time, the Chicago Bulls realized we're going to be looking for a play-by-play guy. Time and place. Adam is also a Chicago kid, grew up a Bulls fan. That helps when you're covering a team and not a league. And he was the right age, the right talent at the right time. It's not just one or the other. It's got to be one and the other. And that's where I always get kind of frustrated that young sportscasters get so frustrated with themselves and get down on themselves like, oh, why can't that be me? Well, do you live in Chicago? Had you been working at ESPN for 10 years? Had you busted your ass in the minor leagues calling 1,000 minor league baseball games like Jason and Adam did? Because those are the things you don't see. All you see is, oh my gosh, two guys in their early 30s already working major gigs at ESPN. Benetti moves to Fox. Adam moves to Fox. They're calling NFL games also. Like, man, how lucky are they? They're not lucky. They busted their asses, but they also combine that with being fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. And I will say this, and you know, if Adam sees this, I don't think he would take umbrage with me saying this. The reverse side of that story, Patrick, is right in front of Adam's face. One of his best friends and a friend of mine, Joe Davis, came up the same way that Adam did. We broke in at the same time at ESPN. Joe left ESPN a couple of years before Adam did because he knew he had an opportunity at Fox and saw that golf leaderboard, so to speak, at ESPN. There are so many talented sportscasters ahead of me at ESPN. No matter how good I am, I'm not going to be able to leapfrog over all of them to get to the games that I want to call. So he left and went to Fox. And then, fortunately for him, Joe Buck decided, I'm done calling the World Series. Nobody expected that. Joe Davis was right there at the right time to do it. So as great as it is for Adam to have the Bulls gig and calling baseball, he was just here Saturday calling Saturday Night Baseball Night in America for Fox when it was the Rays and the Mets. He's going to be calling NFL games every Sunday. Now Adam finds himself behind Joe Davis on that Fox totem pole only because Joe went to Fox a couple of years earlier than Adam. Doesn't make Adam any less of a sportscaster. It's just that golf leaderboard. So the question remains, will Joe ever get to call a Super Bowl? Because Kevin Burkhart's there. Will Adam ever get to call a World Series? Because Joe Davis is there. You're always going to be looking up at somebody. And it just has to be right place, right time, with the right foundational pieces that you bring to the table that make you worthy of a stage that large.
Great that you mentioned all that because in speaking with now sportscasters, that definitely seems to be the theme. Just to mention it that work really hard doing what it is that you're doing, also make those connections along the way, and then pretty much whenever like something will eventually, I think if you're doing the right thing, open up and you'll be in that right place in the right time and take that position that you would want. So I would say that's really seems to be the thing to be doing. And I'm, kind of wondering, going back to nowadays after you did Syracuse and everything, what's kind of your day-to-day process like, just getting into the tactics of it all with the Tampa Bay Rays and also college basketball? Can you give us like an inside look at what you're doing on those days?
Sure. Well, let's stay in the present moment since it's baseball season and I'm getting ready for another pre and post game show tonight. I could show you literally right in front of me how I begin to prepare for a pregame show. I'm not showing this so that you should read everything, but all of that is to show you that the way I start is I always start with my opening paragraph. I'll voice a tease. My producer writes the tease, so I don't have access to that until I get to the ballpark. But what I do know is once the tease is done and the show open runs, we come on air with what's called a locator. And it's always something about St. Petersburg, something about Tropicana Field. And I know I want to write a short paragraph to lead into why you want to watch my pregame show and why you want to tune in for this game on Bally Sports. So I do that the very first thing I wake up in the morning. That's my ritual. I wake up, I get my cup of coffee, I get my kid off to school, and I sit down in front of the computer and I look over some information. What did the White Sox do? What's happening with the Rays? All of that stuff. And then I formulate what I want to be a compelling introductory statement or paragraph about that series, about that game, about that moment. Why you want to watch, what's at stake, essentially. Then in the column on this page, you see I have a ton of notes scribbled. That's all my facts and figures and interesting nuggets that I'm going to work into my pregame show at some point. I just don't know where at this point because I haven't gotten my rundown yet from my producer. But I fill up that column on the side each and every game with trends, stats, nuggets, information that I think is going to be relevant for that night's show. A few hours later, I'll get my rundown from my producer. And then I basically put in all the information that I've already gathered early in the morning into the rundown of the show. It's a 4-segment show. I know we're going to have an interview. I know we're going to hear from Kevin Cash, the manager. I know we're going to talk about lineups. So it's plug and play at that point. Then I end up, so that's my morning in terms of my work related activities. Then a few hours later, before I leave for the ballpark, I'll check MLB.com, and the lineups may or may not be out yet. If they're not, I always go to the ballpark at around 3 o'clock because clubhouse opens usually around 3:30 in advance of a typical first pitch, which for us it's 6:50 during the weeknight games. So the clubhouse opens, I get to the ballpark, I line up whoever I want to talk to based on what's going on in my show that night. Tonight, we're talking about Johnny DeLuca. Played his first 3 games with the Rays this last series, had 6 RBIs. I haven't even met Johnny yet because I had the last series off. So I can't wait to go talk to Johnny, introduce myself to him, and just, get to know him a little bit and pick up maybe a nugget or two so that when I got on the air, I can not only talk about Johnny DeLuca, but I could also do a little name dropping, which is important to give the viewer access. I could say, yeah, I talked to Johnny a few hours ago. He told me blah, 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 blah. That is critical when you are a sportscaster because that's one of the things that a viewer wants the most. They want access. That's what we have as sportscasters. So once I do that, I'm involved in Kevin Cash's pregame scrum, where he speaks to all the media at the same time. Then I head back to the press box. I finish my final prep work for the show. I talk to my producer. By that time, my co-host Doug is there. We're talking about certain ideas, certain things that we have. Then an hour before the show, I go over to my set. 30 minutes before the show, I put on my makeup already. I'm in my seat, and we go over, it's called pre-pro. We go over every element of the show to find mistakes, to refine some of the topics that we're talking about, to maybe tweak some things that didn't work the way that we thought they were going to work. But it's just to get my producer, myself, and my analyst all on the same page, along with everybody else. And then, like I said, 6 o'clock rolls around, the light comes on, and we start our show. And that's essentially what my game prep is for. When the game's over, I'm in the press box, I watch the game, I score the game as if I was calling play-by-play. And then at about the 7th inning, I head back over to the set. And the post-game show is much more reactive than it is. I'm never writing this amount of material in a post-game show because it's all reacting to what you saw.
I wanted to ask about it because a lot of people obviously want to get into sports, just coming right off the point that you mentioned of, your day-to-day process. So just to clarify, you start in the studio and then go to the ballpark and then you're there for a few hours before the few hour game. How long is your day and how many stops are you making?
Well, so just to clarify, when I don't start in a studio. Our home games are done at the ballpark, and the road games are mostly broadcast from a studio. But my day starts at home. I'm in my home office talking to you right now. This is where I do all of my prep work during baseball season and during basketball season. It's either here or at a coffee shop that has free Wi-Fi. That's how I operate. So it goes from here. Obviously, there's a work-life balance thing that goes on. I want to exercise in the morning. Like I said, when I'm home, I like to be as involved with my children as possible. So I might be helping pack lunches, get them off to school, things like that I left out of the conversation. But exercise is a big piece of it. Eating right, which is difficult to do when you're a sportscaster because the games are at night. You're usually, limited in the kind of food that's available at a ballpark or a basketball arena or a football stadium, things like that. But I go from my home office to the ballpark. And once I'm at the ballpark, the 2 places that I do my quote unquote work are in the press box and at my set which is right above the left center field seats in Tropicana Field. All the conversations that I have will take place in the clubhouse or on the field during batting practice. So those are the main areas where I do my work.
That's really good info because like, you're definitely jumping around to a lot of different spots, and I think that's really great. And on the other part, I guess, of the original question a few minutes ago, how about when you're doing that college basketball season, which I know we're out of it, but it will, I'm sure, be here before we know it. Like, how was your day to day when you're calling a Big 12 game?
Yeah, well, that's a lot different, Patrick. And that's, again, one of the things that I embrace. I'm a research hound. I love digging in and finding, you know, information and statistics and things that not everyone can find, although anyone could find them, but not everyone goes to those extents because I want it to be unique. I want people to hear what I have to say and be like, man, I hadn't heard that before. And in this day and age, people are so in tune to trying to get, you know, big social media followings that they'll put all of that stuff on social media. Some of those things I want to save for my broadcasts, for my pre and post game shows with the Rays, but also with my college basketball games. So on the day to day of college basketball prep is much different. Let's just take a typical week because that's really how you have to frame it. My games are usually on Tuesdays and Saturdays. So on Mondays, I am almost always traveling. So the airport is, and not any airport is essentially my de facto office. I have my laptop with me, and any chance I get, I'm doing work at the airport, waiting for a flight, on the airport, getting to a site, a college campus. And then you're in your hotel room Monday night. Usually, if I can, I like to go out to dinner with my analyst and my producer, if that's a possibility. It used to be that was a given. It's not so much anymore. It's harder to build that camaraderie now than it was 15 years ago, certainly 20 and 30 years ago. But it still exists, and it's still critically important. Then Tuesday rolls around, and the first thing, or the first order of business work-wise, is you're going to shoot-arounds. Each team has a shoot-around. The visiting team shoots first, and the home team shoots second. Why? Because the home team gets to sleep in later, because that's home court advantage. And there are classes to be attended if you're the home team. So the road team, for let's say a typical 7 o'clock local time tip, the visiting team would shoot around, let's say around 10 a.m. And they'll shoot around for about an hour. My analyst and I will attend the shoot around. We'll watch. We'll talk to the coach. We'll talk to the players. We'll also talk to the sports information director, the SID, as it's known. They're the people in charge of putting out game notes, which are critical. It's the lifeblood of what we do. And so you talk to those people after their shoot around is done. And then you usually have a meeting between yourself, your analyst, and your producer. Hey, what came out of that meeting that we hadn't already thought about and exchanged emails about leading up to the game? And we'll formulate, some ideas, some storylines that we want to talk about. All of that stuff has been put out there beforehand, before we even get on our flights. It could be, as an example, hey, Patrick, it's Rich Hollenberg. I'm producing your game next Tuesday at Kansas. Hit me up whenever you can with what storylines you're thinking about being the most important. I know you have a game Saturday, but I just wanted to get ahead of the game. So I would respond to my producer and say, hey, yeah, I'm in Texas this weekend, but, I'll be focusing on Kansas State right when that game's done. But here's my treetops view of what that game is, what's at stake for that game. And you talk about winning streaks, losing streaks, rivalries, all of that kind of stuff. Then again, fast forward, once you get through the 2 shoot-arounds, after the second shoot-around, it's, okay, what do we want our open to be? Because that is the stage setter for why this game is important, right? So what do we want to talk about in the open? Do you have any other graphics ideas? that could help illustrate some of the points that we want to make. And we go over that in a meeting, usually at the production truck or right there on the court once that second shoot around is through. Once that's done, I try as hard as I can to be done with my work. I want a 2 to 3 hour window where I could just chill. I could either go back to grab a bite to eat, go back to my room, and just decompress. I do my best before every event that I cover to have at least a pocket of time where I'm not thinking about that game or that event or that show. For me, it just helps clear my mind, helps me kind of balance things out. If I'm anxious or nervous about something or just really excited about a big game coming up, I want to kind of find my equilibrium, if you will. So I'll check in with my wife, I'll touch base about the kids, any other extra work outside of that game, that event, that night. That's when I tackle that. Then I put on my suit. I usually try to carpool with my partner, again, spending that time together, even in a 5 or 10 minute car ride. To me, it's important. To me, it counts. It's cumulative. It means something. So we usually get to the gym anywhere from 2 hours to 90 minutes before tip. We'll see some people who are shooting around on the court, maybe, say hello to some people, anything last minute. Then we get on our headsets an hour before tip and we do what's called a graphics rehearsal. The graphics rehearsal is we go over every single graphic that could possibly be in our show. And that includes promos, that includes things like that. Because we want to make sure that A, they work, B, they're relevant, and C, that there are no typographical errors on there as well. And there are always going to be some mistakes. We find them, and without fail, the one thing that everyone says when we find one is not, oh man, how could you make that mistake? It's, that's why we rehearse, right? We're all on the same team. That's why we rehearse. No one should feel bad about making a mistake. That's why we rehearse. So we do that about an hour before. 30 minutes before, grab a quick bite, put on some makeup. 15 minutes before, I'm in my seat. The crowd is hopefully at full throat already. I'm starting to feel those butterflies, getting really psyched for the game. And then it's let it rip once the tip, goes up, because I am prepared. And I have been prepared not only for hours before this, but in some cases for days before this. And then it's rinse and repeat. I wake up the next morning, I get the earliest flight home I can. The saying, and I credit Fran Fraschilla, who I call a lot of games with, for being the first one I heard to say this, but I've stolen it a million times. They don't pay us to work, they pay us to travel. The travel is the bitch of it. It's hard. Early flights, delayed flights, canceled flights, weather-related issues. It's a bear. Fly home as early as I can Wednesday morning, and then the whole cycle starts again. Prep on Thursday, fly out on Friday, Saturday shoot around, Saturday game, fly home on Sunday, rinse and repeat. But I want to show you something. I'm not disappearing on you, but I have it, all my stash of games right here on my board. So I wanted to share this with you. And again, it's gobbledygook and you're not going to be able to see it all that well. But this, I believe, this is the game that I referred to earlier in our conversation. This is the last game I called this season. Houston and TCU in the Big 12 tournament. And these boards are different for everybody. I use a company, Tony Britt is the guy who runs this company. This is my second full season that I've used Tony, and I swear by him. It does cost money, but for me, it's money well spent because it saves me a lot of time. In the past, what I would do is I would handwrite everything. And then I would, for the teams in the Big 12 that I would cover 3, 4, 5, 6 different times, I would have whiteout over everything that I did so I could update those numbers and those storylines, so much so that by the end of the season, I had like an inch thick of whiteout on these boards. I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So now what Tony's business does is he prints out all the statistics. So all the averages and numbers are all along here, national numbers, are all along here, records, things like that. That's all updated by him, computerized, and then sent over to me because he has my schedule. So he knows what games are coming up for me. So I'll get an email from Tony saying TCU in Houston is ready. So I open up the chart. It's all on Google Docs. And I then input any updated information that I want to put in there off to the side. But like I said, the framework of everything is done for me, and that saves me hours of prep work. And I used to be one of those people, and a lot of sportscasters say this, the way that I learn, my process is by writing. I learn better. I memorize when I write. And I was one of those guys. And that's why I never wanted to invest in something that was done for me. I'm like, I can't do this because then I won't remember everything. But what I realized was typing and writing are essentially the same thing. So now instead of memorizing and learning while I'm writing, I'm memorizing and learning while I'm typing. And then it's up to me while I'm on my plane flights, while I'm waiting at the airport, while I'm in my hotel room to spend the time to know what's on these boards inside and out. Not so that I could repeat everything on here, because at the end of the day, you're probably only going to get to 10% of what's on here. But when the moment comes and a situation calls for it, or a player demands to be spoken of, I don't have to look on my board and go, okay, LJ Cryer, what do I know about LJ Cryer? And then blurt it out. I've looked at these boards enough and committed enough of it, not so much to memory, but just ingesting it, making it part of my base of knowledge, that I don't have to wait and look and then repeat. I just know it. And if I don't know it verbatim, statistically, I say it, and then I could look down and back it up with that statistic. You know, LJ Cryer, another three, one of the hottest shooters in the Big 12 over the last 5 games. I know that because I remembered typing that in. And then I pause. My analyst talks about LJ. While my analyst is talking about LJ, I'm looking at LJ's notes. And then I could put a bow on it by saying 53% from 3 over the course of his last 3 games. And it all works. The one question everybody asks more than any about this kind of prep work is, how do you know so much when you go into a game? You know all the guys' names and all their numbers and all these statistics. First things first, and Marv Albert said it in his book, and that book is timeless, by the way. I highly recommend it. It's called I'd Love to, But I Have a Game. He talks about his process of memorizing names and numbers. In a hotel room, and he spent half of his career in hotel rooms, he would put names and numbers on index cards and just put them in random places around his hotel room. So everywhere he looked, it was Patrick McCall, 32, Rich Hollenberg, 10. And so you just soak it all in that way. I don't do that. Again, I do it better by writing. I want to write out the whole roster. I want to see how many names and numbers I know by heart. But I have to know them all by heart. That is the one thing that you have to memorize. Names and numbers. Names and numbers. That is critical. That is unforgivable in my book if you don't have that memorized. All the other stuff, it's in front of you. And if you access it, great. But like I said, 10% of it is what you're going to use. The other 90%, maybe use it in the next game. Maybe it just wasn't as important as you thought. But you let the game dictate what information you put out there. It's not our job to vomit all the information that we learned. It's our job to put the right information in to match the moment of the game. So that's essentially what game prep is like for me. I spend a lot less time doing this now because I'm not handwriting it. This usually, to fill out an entire game board, not consecutively, I would say takes about 3, maybe 4 hours tops. Again, once you get into the conference schedule, I'm seeing these teams over and over again, so it makes it that much easier as well. But for teams that I've never seen, 3 to 4 hours is probably how much time I would spend filling that out. And then another few hours making sure that I digest that information. So it's not just written down in front of me, it's already in my head, and what's in front of me can complement that information.
You have a lot of great insight in that last. I would say for the people that are more in tune with broadcasting or listening to this as a broadcaster, I like that you brought up Tony Britt because I haven't used his boards, but I see a lot of people like him. And secondly, kind of the way that your process is, I think that a lot of your insight you just gave out is going to help people that are preparing for games right now. And then for the people that maybe aren't as in tune with broadcasting and something that I've heard of, something you were talking about earlier with the TV side, kind of when you're going to a game, like I don't know if it's I want to say chaotic, but how much like timing and pressure is it when you're in the middle of a game and you have like a producer in your ear, you know you have to hit these points that you guys have planned out for. Like how important is timing and what's kind of like, I guess just can you give us an example of what's going on during like, you're going to go to a timeout. You're going to have, I guess, a conversation with your producers and then come back out of a timeout in a big moment. I mean, how many different storylines and topics and the producer and your color guy, like how much do you have to balance and how hard is that right in the middle of a game?
I call it spinning plates, Patrick. And you have, if you're a play-by-play guy, the term that I use, and this kind of butts right up against the fact that we're all grinders and we're not stars. You know, we might have had stars in our eyes when we first decided we want to be sportscasters, but we're grinders. You have to love the work. So I consider myself a glorified traffic cop because I have some of what you talked about and more that I'm dealing with at the same time. I don't like to call it multitasking because that almost makes it sound like everything is of equal importance. The most important thing is the game. The most important thing is the audience watching the game, giving them access and the important information in an entertaining way. So that is first and foremost. All the other stuff, you're just spinning those plates and trying to keep them from falling and crashing. So you're going to have your headsets on, and a good producer is just like a good play-by-play person. Less is more. I don't need a producer yapping in my ear all the time because A, I am locked in on the game and that takes away my focus, but also because I want to be a good listener with my analyst. I want to learn something from my analyst. I want to play off what my analyst is saying and ask him or her relevant questions, pertinent questions. So there's an interaction there that's also extremely valuable. You just learn by doing the reps how much is involved. The producer talking to you. We have a graphic coming up. The good producers will wait till you're done speaking. I think that's kind of producer 101. You never want to talk to a talent in their ear while they're talking. I don't care how good you are, you're not going to be able to fully understand the direction from your producer while you're saying something at the same time. So a good producer knows I'll wait till he finishes his thought, and then when the other guy's talking, then I'll get in his ear and keep it short. Just like I tell play-by-play men, keep it short. Edit yourself, speak in clips and captions and phrases. That's what good producers do also. So we're going to get to promo one on the whistle. That's all you need to say. A producer doesn't need to say, hey, Rich, the next time a whistle blows, I want you to grab promo one and we're going to read it. It's the one that talks about the next game that's coming up. I don't need all that information. Just tell me the essentials. Promo one on the whistle. And then I know what's coming up. And the more you do it, the more you get used to it. And the first time you do it, it's going to be like, you were shot out of a cannon. And then things just start to slow down for you. And it becomes almost like a dance routine that you've done time and time and time again. So being a good listener, that's important. Listening to your producer when he or she speaks to you, that's also important. You're serving both of those masters. But the most important master you're serving is the audience. So it's okay if you blow off something that you know is not critical because you have the belief what I'm about to say or what we're in the middle of shouldn't be interrupted right now. Like it's an organic moment, it's happening, blah, blah, blah. Then you go to break and, again, in basketball, you get used to it. there are media timeouts at every 4-minute mark. So it's the under 16 TV timeout, it's the under 12 TV timeout, it's the under 8 and the under 4 TV timeout. So as we're approaching that, a good producer is going to go, we're going to toss the break the next time out, tease an interview with so and so. So when we come, the whistle blows, I look up at the clock and it's 15:56 to go in the half. I know we're going to a timeout. So I say 15:56 to go in the game. We've reached our first media timeout. On the other side of this break, we'll talk with Shaquille O'Neal. Stay tuned. And then you're out. You lay out. Laying out is the best tool that you can embrace as a sportscaster. It allows you to hit the reset button. It allows the audience to soak up what you're saying. It gives your words more value. It just works all the way around. There's a multitude of reasons why sportscasters in general should talk less than they do. But that's just, in a nutshell, a few of the key reasons. So again, to answer your point, short story long, there are a lot of plates that are spinning at any given time. That's also why it is so important for you to have a grasp on the teams that you're announcing and what's at stake in the game. Because when all else fails, you know the essentials and what's important. And it's not only just okay to repeat your best stuff, it's encouraged to repeat your best stuff. So even if 5 times in the course of one game, from opening tip to double zeros at the end, if you say the winner of this game clinches a share of the conference regular season championship, that's fine. It might sound repetitive to you because you're hearing yourself say it 5 times, but you never know when someone's tuning in for the first time and they're going to hear it once and they're going to be like, oh, that's so cool. I didn't even realize how important this game was. And there's always something important about every game. You just might have to dig a little more to find it. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's more challenging, but always there is an angle, a hook to keep viewers tuning in.
There's so much we could just dive into with that, and that gave a lot of, again, insight into the realm of what's going on. But I guess it's definitely just a lot of timing, preparation, and experience, like you pretty much summed it up. And just because, again, we could talk all day about that, but definitely to keep it more concise, get into the last few topics here. How much is your, and this definitely applies for the young broadcasters that are listening, and they're going after every opportunity, but how much has your family life changed and your perspective on broadcasting and what you're going to, how you go about what you're doing in your career now?
Yeah, excellent question, Patrick, especially from someone, of your age, because I know when I was your age, I didn't think about that. And I wish I had, to be honest with you, because it recalibrates what your belief system is. We have to be selfish in this business. We have to look out for ourselves more than anybody because no one's going to look out for us more than we are ourselves. But at the same time, when a spouse enters the picture and then children enter the picture, you're not just doing what you do in a vacuum. One of the things I tell all young sportscasters is, and this isn't to scare them off, it's just to give them a reality check. You're going to be missing a lot of birthday parties, a lot of holidays, a lot of events. You're going to be working nights and weekends and holidays when all your other buddies are with their friends and with their family and partying their asses off. You're going to be like, I wish I could do that, but I've got a game. Going back to Marv Albert's book, I'd love to, but I have a game. He spent his entire life saying that. That's why it's the title of his book. And now I've lived that for 30 years. Even the little things, missing a little league game. I can't count how many ballet recitals and basketball games and things like that I've missed because I had a game. But it's all okay. And you're able to kind of live with that and negotiate that in your own head if you have a support system that's okay with it as well. If my wife gave me the cold shoulder every time I came home from a road trip because I missed helping my youngest son study for a math test, or because she had a drive all over God's green earth to get my daughter to cheerleading and my son to basketball and my other son to a math tutor, and no one's around to help, and she's doing it all by herself. She's the one who's working harder than I am. I'm doing what I love, and she loves being a mom, but it's a lot harder work than what I do. If I didn't have that support system, I wouldn't be able to survive. I I would, but I just wouldn't be married and I wouldn't have kids. But my wife embraces the fact that I'm still every day living out my dream, and the fact that my kids see that. None of my kids, not one of my children, wants to do what I do for a living. I can only imagine how proud a father must be when his child says, I want to do what you do, Dad. That's got to be an amazing feeling. My dad didn't get that from me, and I'm not getting that from my children. But what I am providing my children, and I will go to my grave feeling proudest about, is that I showed them that anything is possible. I wasn't born into this business. I got to where I got because of what I did, because of the work that I put in, whether it was away from the camera or in front of the camera, building a network, being nice to people, always saying yes to opportunities, having a good attitude, putting in the hours, all of that stuff. My children now see that whatever you want to do, you can accomplish as long as you love it and you're willing to work for it. So they're not going to be sportscasters, and my two sons might not end up working in sports at all, although they love sports. But whatever they do, they know they have the framework of, well, my dad's doing one of the toughest things he could do, one of the most demanding professions you can be in, and he made it. So I guess what I'm doing, if I apply that same ethic, then I can make it too. And that's how dreams become reality. So at very least, I could go to sleep every night hoping that I pass that information along to my children.
That the family side of it, it's a really good roundup because I that's one of the things I try to keep in mind of what it could be like down the line because I don't, have that family aspect, but I definitely know family's been around longer than broadcasting, so I don't want to be
Right.
ignorant to what that could change my perspective. So I always try and ask, people about that in terms of how it will change theirs because I don't want to, be thinking I'm too cool for it and then come down the line, you get a family and it will really change your perspective like you mentioned. So that's really good insight. But the second to last topic, I mean, break in, break through the cohort. It's been it's your business. You've got a really good thing going. There's a lot of happy customers. Everybody seems to be talking about it all over, social media and what it's done for them. Can you just basically, I guess, definitely young broadcasters out there want to listen up, speak of what it is, kind of what's the process and how that came about?
Yeah, it came about because of COVID, to be quite honest with you. I was stuck in this office doing a whole lot of nothing, like everyone was. And I had a lot of students, mostly Syracuse students, who I was connected with because of that, reach out to me and say, Hey, Rich, would you mind looking at my demo reel? And I was like, Sure, I'd love to do that. And I started doing it and realized how much I enjoyed that process, that back and forth, that give and take, the critical feedback that I wished I had when I was coming up. And I was talking to my best friend about it. And he's an entrepreneur and he has his own business, completely independent of sports. And he said, You could make a business out of this. And I said, Oh, what are you talking about? Like, who wants to hear what I have to say? And I don't have enough to say anyway. And he's like, We should dive into this. And we did. And I committed myself to coming up with the framework of a program. And at first it was 6 weeks because I'm like, Andy, there is no way I could get 8 weeks worth of material. And he's like, Yes, you can. We could figure this out. So he was the driving force behind it. He was kind of the proverbial wind beneath my wings. But all of it is just the idea that I wanted to help the next generation of sportscasters avoid all the pitfalls that I went through, avoid the mistakes that I made and help them in a way that I didn't get help coming up. And I got a ton of help from a ton of different people. We don't do it ourselves. We can't do it all alone. We need to stand on people's shoulders to get to wherever we want to get to. But there were some fundamental things that were missing in our industry on the come up. And the most important thing was critical feedback. But then the more I thought about it, there were other things that I felt that my 30 years in the business were of value to some younger people. So I put that framework together and I took a course on LinkedIn about branding yourself because I didn't know the first thing about that. And I jumped into the deep end and I said, I'm either going to sink or I'm going to swim, but at least I'm going to try. At least I'm going to give it a try because I thought about it, I talked about it, and I finally got the gumption to give it a shot. And it was a lot of money invested and a lot of time invested, more time than money, but it was well worth it. And the success is only because of the people that have come through. It has nothing to do with what I've done. And I say that to everyone. We're now at over 130 alumni who've come through the cohort. And I say to each and every one of them, not to devalue or diminish what Break In and Breakthrough is, because obviously it's my baby. I feel like it is valuable. But there is nothing I could say, nothing I could advise, nothing I could coach anybody on that will take the place of getting reps, just going out and doing it yourself and learning through that trial process, that research and development process, learning what works for you, how to find your own voice, how to be the best version of yourself on the air, how to land the next job in your career path without the help of an agent. Because I don't think agents are as nearly as critical as young sportscasters think they are. They're terrific, but not at this stage in your career. But that doesn't mean you can't make a great career for yourself. I show you how to do that because no one showed me how to do that. I learned the hard way. Hopefully, this makes it a little bit easier for the up and coming sportscasters to do so. And then the last thing that was the biggest benefit that I saw and is proven to be is the sense of community that people have once they join and then become alumni is, man, my network is growing because of this. My understanding of the landscape of sportscasting is growing because of this. And now my confidence is growing because of this, because I'm surrounded by like-minded people. So I know I'm not alone in feeling anxious or frustrated or less than. You got to count the wins. You have to understand how lucky we are to be doing what we are at whatever level we are. And then you keep looking ahead and keep putting in the work and keep grinding. And it's going to pay off sometimes sooner, sometimes later, but it's always going to pay off.
Yeah, and for those, by the way, that are interested, as Rich, talked about his cohort, I'll have more, whatever you're listening to the podcast, I'll have more in the description of that on his website. You can go check it out for yourself. It's really been an interesting thing that he started and got a lot of great feedback. So my last thing, just, to round it out, what are your next couple broadcasts? How can people tune in? And secondly, do you have any big goals you're looking forward to in the future?
Wow. Well, unless you get the Bally Sports app and want to watch Rays baseball, that's where I'll be camped out for the next 3 or 4 months until basketball season rolls around. We're on Bally Sports. Where if you're in the state of Florida, you could catch us. So maybe you're vacationing, maybe you're living there. Find Bally Sports Sun, and you'll find me before and after every Rays game. As far as goals, you know what? At the risk of sounding pretentious, Patrick, I like to keep my goals to myself. What I encourage everybody to do is take your dreams and write them down because then they become goals. I still have dreams and I still write them down to make them goals. And now I have maybe some less time to accomplish those than someone like you does, who's just at the beginning of your career. But there are still some boxes I want to check. And I'd like to believe that those boxes are able to be checked by someone like me. But personally, I like to keep them to myself for the time being. But if and when I do, you'll be the first one to know about it.
Well, nothing wrong with keeping it to yourself, and I do wish you luck. I feel like you're definitely going to be able to accomplish those goals. If anyone's got any type of ability to do so. But I really thank you again for your time. You're a busy guy. Didn't have to come on and do this, and you got a lot going on, especially with a Major League Baseball season to go out there and be a part of. So, anyways, that is Rich Hollenberg. Thank him so much for joining us. Information about him and the break and breakthrough, you can all find that in the description. But again, Rich, thanks so much for coming on. Hope we can stay in touch.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was an honor. It was a pleasure, and I can't wait to watch this podcast blow up and watch your career blow up as well, Patrick. You're the best.
All right. Wish you luck. Thanks again, Rich.
Thanks, buddy.
I'll see you around.